there has been strong bipartisan support for Ukraine since this war began. I think we've seen a real shift because there's an understanding that what happens in Ukraine is important to the United States. It affects our national security. Ukraine has changed the way conflict is done, the way warfare is done. They have the most innovative, the most technologically advanced army in Europe right now, and they have lessons that on drones and counter drones that they could share with the United States. I think people are recognizing how important that is for us in our future. And when President Zelensky was here last week and met with over half of the Senate, one of the things we talked about was the kind of partnership that Ukraine and the United States could do as we're looking at what's happening with the war in Iran and the need to address the drone attacks against the United States, that Ukraine could be very helpful to us as we look to counter those attacks.
Senator, I want to go to a different vote. The reason you're not here at the table is because you're doing this vote, but there's also the vote on Todd Blanche that's coming at some point to confirm him as the Attorney General of the United States. And I want to play for you some sound from Lisa Murkowski. She's talking to one of our colleagues about where she is on this vote.
I've talked to the Epstein survivors, and I've talked to Mr. Blanche. He feels that, and I don't want to put words in his mouth, but what he shared with me was that he feels that he did listen. Their response was that they felt he did not listen and was dismissive. Most of the constituent mail or calls that we're receiving are opposed to the nomination. Much of which has to do with Epstein.
Most of the calls we're receiving are opposed to the nomination. I imagine that all of you there think about these things when you vote. But she's also told, Lisa Murkowski has also told MS Now that, yes, she feels closer to a decision on how she'll vote for acting AG Todd Blanche. At some point it's going to happen, and she's going to issue a statement rather than do it in a little dribs and drabs here and there. You know, Lisa Murkowski, how much are the calls that she's getting, the pressure she's receiving to say no to Todd Blanche, how much do you think that's weighing on her decision here?
Well, I'm sure she's considering a number of factors, including what Todd Blanche has done. And there is a lot of opposition to him. He has been the president's private attorney. It's not clear to me that he understands that the Attorney General of the United States doesn't represent the President of the United States. He represents the people of the United States. And what we've seen from Todd Blanche is this idea to create this slush fund that he now claims he's made a statement in writing that he would not try and recreate that. The president has walked that back and has not committed to that. He also set up this really the opportunity for Donald Trump and his family and his businesses to be free from IRS oversight. Now, I have to pay my taxes. My constituents have to pay their taxes. It's not fair to put Donald Trump and his companies and his family above the law, and that's what Todd Blanche has been willing to do. So I hope that Lisa Murkowski and Bill Cassidy will decide that they are not going to support Todd Blanche so that he's not going to move forward as Attorney General.
Yeah, and just to clarify, the statement he sent didn't even say he wouldn't recreate it. It would just say that it's dead currently. They didn't say anything about whether or not it could come back. That's one of the concerns I know a lot of you on the Hill have.
Correct.
You know, Senator, I think I want to pull back the covers a little bit more on that, because it is the most annoying part of this for me is we do see all this song and dance, all this tiptoeing through the tulips and pretending and wringing of hands and gnashing of teeth, only to do what everybody in the country knows you're going to do from the very beginning. I don't see a way that this nomination falls flat because two senators decided to stand on principle and say no. And that's the frustration I think a lot of Americans feel right now. as they watch these narratives unfold. You've got the president himself, and I love this. You know, he's prepared to roll up his sleeves and go to Capitol Hill and lobby. Let's listen to the president talk about what he's ready to do.
Lobby, if I need to, I will lobby very, very diligently because he's outstanding.
Will you reach out to Senator Murkowski, Senator Cassidy, for instance?
Let's see if we need anybody. I'll reach out to whoever I have to, but anybody voting against him would be doing a great disservice to the country.
More like doing a great disservice to Donald Trump. The great disservice to the country would be passing on his nomination and making him the next attorney general. My thought. But how do you see this process? Pull back the covers, because I'm just trying to understand. I've seen this not just from Republicans, but from Democrats, again, on a big issue, an important issue, certainly one that's important to the country. We have this sort of this pro forma dance that you're actually, not you, Senator, but the individuals in question are actually perplexed and vexed by this decision when, in fact, they're not. They know they're voting to approve. So I don't understand why you just don't come out and say, yeah, he's got my vote, move on.
Well,
no.
You'd have to ask those senators who are still holding out about that. But I think what Americans are frustrated about is that Donald Trump ran for office and got elected saying he was going to do something about the affordability crisis, about what people are paying for groceries and energy and rents and health care. And he said he was going to not get us into endless wars. And he's reneged on all those campaign promises. And so many of my colleagues here have had the opportunity to hold him accountable, and they've refused to do that. That's what we need to do. Congress, the Constitution and the founding fathers and mothers of America set up this country so that there would be 3 separate branches of government, because they were worried that we would have a leader who thinks he could be king, just like King George, who they were trying to fight a revolution to get away from. And that's why they set up the oversight and the overlapping branches of government, because they didn't want a king. They didn't want one person to be able to make all the decisions. And that's what people are frustrated about. They don't see their lives getting better, and they see that Donald Trump promised he was going to do certain things, and he's not done them. He's done just the opposite. The economy's gotten worse. People are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet, and we're fighting a war in Iran that's driving up gasoline prices and energy costs for Americans, and Americans are paying the price, and they're tired of it, and I don't blame them.